Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
We can, sir, yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you. For those of you who've not been at the examination before, welcome. My name is Mike Ward, and I'm one of the two inspectors appointed to jointly examine the Greater Norwich Local Plan. My joint inspector, Mr. Hatfield, will also be leading some of the sessions this morning. I'll be leading the first two matters, and then Mr. Hatfield will be leading the other matters. But we may have questions on all of them, even though we're not leading them. I'd just like to say that the usual reminder that the session is being recorded, just in the event of backup, and it will be deleted once it is no longer needed in accordance with data regulations. Please keep your phones off or to silent, and for those of you who are new to us today, please use your hand raise function if you wish to speak. This morning we are dealing with matter 14, which is the other site allocations and site-specific policies, and we will start with the issue 1, which is the university-related allocations. Before we do that, could the partnership please introduce the members of its team who will be speaking today, please?
Good morning, sir. My name's Sam Walker. I will be speaking with regards to issue 1 alongside my colleague Mike Burrell, who's just appeared.
Yes, so I'll be here for issues 1 and 2.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. And is the Bidwell's here in terms of James Allett? I think it is, isn't it, James Allett?
Yes, James Allflat here. Yeah.
Thank you. Could I just start on the university related allocations? There are 4 particular sites, so I'd like to just get an overview of the proposals, and then I've got some questions on each of the sites and some need to get some understanding of some of the issues relating to them. But can I just check that the university is not seeking any modifications to the policies?
That's correct, sir.
Thank you. In that case, if I'll turn to the partnership, but you may wish to turn to Mr. Afflet. I'll leave it to you. But if you could just give me an overview, please, of the university-related proposals.
Of course, sir. Yes, we've got 4 sites, as you mentioned. 3 of the sites are variations of sites which are allocated in the adopted local plan. First one, GNLP 0133BR, is the land adjoining the Enterprise Centre and Earlham Hall. So this was a previous allocation, part of which has been built out with, which is the Enterprise Centre, a sustainable building for university and research-related uses. So this element is the remainder of that allocation, where we're seeking similar research and development on educational-related uses. And due to the sensitivity of this site being adjacent to the Grade 2 star listed Earlham Hall, we're looking for low-rise building in that location. We then have GNLP 0133C, which is land north of Cow Drive, Blackdale building, adjoining Hickling House and Barton House. This was a former school which was taken on by the university several years ago. They have built out part of this site with student accommodation. The consent for that also includes a second phase, which is for additional student accommodation on that site, which hasn't commenced at present, but is allocated for continuing its plan. So it's an allocation, but it has an existing consent on that site. Then we have GNLP 0133DR, land between Suffolk Walk and Bluebell Road. This was previously allocated as a strategic reserve in the adopted local plan for any additional development that may be required in the plan period. This is actually an enlarged allocation, so it extends further to the north towards the existing built campus, and this is where the majority of the development within the UEA campus is expected to be delivered. We then have GNLP 0133E, land at the UEA grounds depot site. This one hasn't previously been allocated, and this is what we're calling the new strategic reserve to come forward once other sites have been delivered. And this one is allocated for student accommodation and possible additional student-related uses in a small amount. I don't know if Mr. Allflat would like to add anything to that overview.
No, I think you've done a very good job there, Mr. Walker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walker. Just Mr. Afflet, are you just able to? That's very helpful, Mr. Walker. Thank you. We'll pick up some of those site-specific matters in a moment. But Mr. Afflet, are you just able to just explain to me effectively what is going on at the university over the period of the plan, and why it is necessary for this expansion of the university? I don't need to look at site-specific matters now, but just a general overview of what's happening at the university over the plan period.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Hopefully you'll have seen the draft development framework strategy, which is part of the evidence base that has informed the proposed allocation of these sites, and within that document it clearly sets out the need for additional growth at the university. I think it's fair to say the university is a very successful institution and continues to grow, and the forecasted expectation is that student numbers will increase from 2016 levels of approximately 17,000 students to 22,000 students by the end of the plan period. Obviously, that increase in student numbers is significant, and only in the last few years we've seen rapid growth, and that growth is forecast to continue, particularly in STEM subjects at the university. So consequently, that requires more land, more academic accommodation, more student accommodation, and more student welfare ancillary facilities. So the development framework strategy that is part of the evidence base has clearly set out how we've arrived at those quantums of floor space based upon the student number increase that is anticipated. So in truth, sir, it's effectively responding to the positive success that the university has already had, and facilitating an estate that allows further growth and further success of the university over the plan period.
Thank you, Mr. Afflet. And what confidence is there that these sites can be delivered in terms of their allocations?
Yeah, well, obviously all the sites are within the university's sole control. They're all within their ownership. A lot of due diligence has already been done on those sites in terms of any technical constraints to their delivery to ensure that they are suitable, available and deliverable. And as Mr. Walker's already outlined, some of those sites were previously allocated or partially allocated in the current development plan. So the fact is these are sites that are available. They have been tested in terms of the environmental considerations to make sure that they are suitable and deliverable in the plan period. And certainly the forecasts we have on student numbers and the requirements for academic space going forward would certainly guide us to indicate that these sites are required during the plan period.
Thank you very much, Mr. Afflet. Can I just go back to the four sites that you referred to, Mr. Walker? And I've just got, if we look at them in order, the Enterprise Centre, you've referred to the concerns around heritage matters at Earlham Hall. Can you just explain to me what those concerns are, and how the policy and whether the policy wording is sufficiently clear and robust in order to be effective to address those concerns.
Yes, sir. I'm not sure. I would say constraints rather than concerns. I think, as stated, there's already been a consent for, or there's been development on this site, and there's also been a subsequent consent that wasn't implemented on the carried forward element of this allocation, which was as an approval. The reason that wasn't brought forward was due to the viability constraints, because it included subterranean development, which was overly costly. So that was why that scheme wasn't brought forward. So it's not necessarily that the constraints are that much that we don't see it being possible to develop. It very much can, and consents have been passed. The allocation wording regarding this has been reviewed by Historic England, and they asked us for a little bit of amendments, which we included during the consultation process. So we're confident that the allocation wording does cover the heritage constraints for the site appropriately.
Mr. Afflet.
Thank you, sir. I think the only thing to add to that is the quantum or capacity of this proposed site allocation has been reduced this time round to reflect the fact that Mr. Walker outlined. So the previous consent anticipated circa 7,000 square metres of floor space on the site, and as Mr. Walker outlined, it was part of that was subterranean, which impacted the viability of bringing forward a scheme. So the proposed allocation is certainly now looking at approximately 5,000 square metres of floor space, acknowledging that we're not going to achieve subterranean development and keeping it at a low story level.
Thank you very much, Mr. Afflet. Thank you, it's helpful. Can we look at Cow Drive, which is the next site? Can you just explain to me on Cow Drive, because there was a consented scheme, and I wasn't totally clear how the, well, I suppose what I'm seeking to understand is how this relates to the consented scheme, and whether the 400 figure of bedrooms is overlaps with the 514 scheme, or whether it is completely separate.
I confirm that the 514 is the delivered element of the previous larger allocation, and the 400 is the phase 2, which is the undeveloped element of the site. So that is, there is consent for phase 2, which is the 400. So the 514 doesn't overlap, that is delivered, and that's no longer part of this allocation. The 400 is the remainder of that consent, second phase, which is comes under this, so no crossover with that. I should probably also confirm that the 514 were delivered before the plan period, so they're not counted within the plan at all, those numbers.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Thank you. On the policy wording, Mr. Walker, if you look at the policy, the way the policy is written, there are 3 criteria, and then there's a paragraph at the bottom which relates to access. Is that meant to be separate as a standalone paragraph?
I think that it probably should have a number. Actually, that's it's probably a drafting error, I would imagine, rather than there's not a particular reason for it to be a standalone paragraph.
I'll just make a note of that. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Walker. If we can look at Suffolk Walk C. Can you just explain to me a little bit more detail about what is expected in this site? It's clearly it's an area of open space, isn't it, at the moment? That sits between the developed form and the is it called the Broad? Is it there? Can you just explain to me what is intended to take place there?
This area was part of the original. It was an undeveloped part of the original scheme that was proposed for the university back in the 1960s. This is it may well be Mr. Allflat may be able to describe better what is going to be here, because this covers a wide range of uses for the university. Would that be acceptable to pass to Mr. Allflat?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed, Mr. Allflat. That'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, this is by far going to be the largest allocation proposed on the campus, and this is where we see that the majority of the academic growth going, circa 29,000 square metres of floor space to be accommodated in this part of the campus. As Mr. Walker's outlined, this was part of the original Lasdon master plan area that was anticipated to be developed back in the 1960s, but never actually came to fruition for various reasons. But it was part of this allocation was obviously a strategic reserve site in the last local plan. A number of the sites that were identified back then have been delivered, and we're now suggesting that this is no longer a strategic reserve but actually an allocation site, because without it the university's growth won't be able to be accommodated in the plan period. So predominantly academic accommodation within this zone.
Thank you. And how does the now that this is translated into a specific allocation, how does that? What are the key changes from any of the assumptions made for it in terms of a strategic reserve site?
Is that to me or to Mr. Walker?
I don't mind who can answer it. Whoever. You're in support of the plan, Mr. Allflat, so I'm happy for you to answer that question if the partnership are happy for you to answer it. I suppose what I'm seeking, it might not be clear. What I'm seeking is how this effectively, how does this policy relate to the previous assumptions on the site that were set out in the previous local plan?
Do you want to start, Mr. Walker, and then I'll come back?
You're on mute, Mr. Walker, if you had to.
All right, so I'll respond to this one, then pass on to Mr. Allflat. It's the actual content of the policy is very similar to the existing policy. A little bit more detail has been added. I think the key issue here is when one looks at the plan. You note there's an area where there isn't proposed to be development between Coleman House and this proposed allocation, and that's because there's a hill called the Prospect, which actually forms a very important part of the university's open space. So that is to be retained, and development here needs to reflect needs to be designed to reflect that. I'll now pass over to Mr. Allflat.
Thank you, sir. I think the key thing to acknowledge, as Mr. Burrell's outlined, is the prospect and respect for that. I think it's useful to understand, though, what the prospect is, and effectively it is leftover construction spoil from the 1960s development of the university campus. But over the intervening time, that has developed local significance as an area of open space, and certainly a vital point because of its elevated nature. So certainly the policy has regard to that. I think the key difference for this plan is the university's done further capacity studies looking at potential layout of buildings and how they could be accommodated. A key theme of development on campus is how the landscape integrates with the built form. That was a key driver of the original concept for the university campus, and certainly one that the university is keen to carry on. So fingers of green space will feed between buildings to ensure the landscape is integrated within the built form. So that work has actually been undertaken in the background to demonstrate that we can deliver circa 29,000 square metres of floor space on this part of the campus.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alflat. Thank you. Can we turn to D, which is the grounds depot at Bluebell Road, and this is where sorry, Mr. Alflat.
Sorry, sir. Just before we go on, back to Suffolk Walk and Bluebell Road. One point I just wanted to make was with regard to para 2.39 of the supporting text to the policy. We flagged this at Reg 19, where it talks about opening up new areas of public access as a consequence of delivering this site. I guess I just would welcome a bit of clarification from the partnership what they mean by that, given that the university is already an open, publicly accessible campus. So I just question how effective that will be, given that the university campus is already open and publicly accessible. Thank you.
Thank you for raising that point, Mr. Alflat. I think that is something that we would need to take away and consider on that, because I can understand the points that you've raised on that, and it is something that we should have addressed, and I apologise for that. So that is something that we will take away to review. So
just so I can understand, the university is concerned with the comment about public access. It says paragraph 2.39, public access to university broad from Bluebell Road, including cycle routes, must be retained and enhanced. Is that the concern of the university?
I think there it's the second sentence. It's since the proposal involves the loss of existing open space, any development must include the opening up of new areas for public access. I just really welcome clarification on what new areas that the partnership are considering, given that the whole campus is already open and publicly accessible, and the university prides itself on the public accessibility of its campus.
I would accept that point, and I understand from personal experience of the campus how publicly accessible and open it is. It is something that we'll have to take away and look at whether that needs to be removed.
But that's not referred to in the policy, is it? The policy doesn't require public access to be provided. Alternative public access or open space.
So
yeah, correct. So I think it was just a point, and that's why we're not making much of it. It is in supporting text, but it was just a point that we flagged at Reg 19, but hasn't been resolved. So I thought it was just appropriate to raise it now.
So Mr. Walker, there is then a conflict between what is in supporting text says and what the policy says, because the policy, unless I'm missing it, doesn't actually say that the development must provide new areas of public access as
So I think you went on mute before.
I did accidentally. I leant across my keyboard, and it's sorry. The policy does not require the development to provide for any compensation for a loss of public open space. It doesn't require any new open space to be provided.
That's correct, sir.
So what is the position?
We'll take a view from yourself, sir, but I think we could accept the deletion of that from the supporting text.
Just so I understand then that was that something that was considered before and was deemed to be something that was not appropriate to take forward, or is it an error about the nature of the open space that the development would sit on?
I would say the former, sir, something that was considered whether it could be achieved. I think subsequently we acknowledge that it can't.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Can I turn to then the grounds depot side of Bluebell Road? And this is now a site that is proposed as a strategic reserve. Can you just explain to me what how that trigger mechanism to bring it into play would operate? I think it's set out in the first criteria, isn't it, of the policy?
Yes, the trigger would be that the sites listed in criteria 1 of the policy would be completed to enable the development of this site to come forward.
So once those other developments have taken place that are listed there, in full, because it's first to completion, this site could then come forward.
That's correct, sir. Yes.
And is that comparable to the trigger mechanism that would have applied to the strategic reserve site that we've just looked at between Suffolk Walk and Bluebell Road in the circle plan?
I have that policy open. I can read it. So the trigger mechanism previously for R41 said the land is identified as a strategic reserve for future development by UEA and should only be released subsequent to the development of the Blackday School site and Earlham Hall site. So I guess the wording in the new policy is strengthened to a degree, isn't it?
So, Mr. Walker, have you finished there? Sorry. Yes.
Sorry. Like as I say, yeah, the wording is different. So the comparison is subsequent to development. It says on the previous strategic allocation. This one says subject to the completion of development. So that has been strengthened to an extent. I have to say, I can't recall why we added the completion of development to that. This would have been part of discussions with other officers at Norwich City Council to come up with the mechanism. So I wouldn't like to propose a modification to that, but if you would like us to consider that, that can be something that can be taken away.
No, no, thank you, Mr. Walker. No, I'm not suggesting that. I'm just trying to understand how the trigger mechanism would work. Just one question. This is about student accommodation, and is there any scenario that would need to be triggered before the completion of those developments?
I do not believe so. So no, as stated in the MRQs from Bidwell's in response to these sites, they're unable to achieve their full extent of development that they require on campus. So they are supportive of student accommodation developments within the city centre to accommodate some of the needs of their students. Whilst they have a preference for, I hope I'm not putting words in Mr. Orfat's and he can come back on this, but whilst they have a preference for all first year students to be on campus, I believe that they're supportive of off-site student accommodation as well. So Mr. Orflat may wish to come in on that matter.
Please, yeah, Mr. Orflat, thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think Mr. Walker has started to summarise it. The university currently has a policy to accommodate or offer on-campus accommodation to all first-year undergraduates. There is a recognition by the university that that policy has to change because hopefully, so you appreciate that the geographical extent of the university campus is constrained and there's a lot of environmental sensitivities around the wider campus. Therefore, the university does need to make the decision to prioritise academic development over student accommodation. And therefore, whilst we still have phase 2 at Blackdale, which we've already discussed this morning, that's 400 bed spaces. The anticipation is that we are going to need to rely more heavily on off-site purpose-built student accommodation within the city. But having said that, the university is still committed to wanting to deliver a certain amount of on-campus accommodation, and that's what the Grounds Depot site is certainly there to help deliver. And whilst it is being identified as a strategic reserve site, I would just emphasise that it will be required, possibly to the tail end of the plan period, but it definitely will be required during the plan period for student accommodation.
Thank you. And that then would accord though with the completion of those developments. So it'd only be released after those developments, Blackdale School, Earlham Hall site, and then between Suffolk Walk and Bluebell Road have been completed. Is that correct?
That's right, sir. So I guess the scenario you could foresee is, given what we said about Suffolk Walk accommodating predominantly academic floor space, if Blackdale's already developed by that time, and there's nowhere else to deliver student accommodation on campus, and we haven't completed Suffolk Walk, that could just be the only scenario I see where student accommodation may be needed on Grounds Depot, but would be in breach of this policy. But other than that, we're happy with how it's drafted.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Walker, Mr. Bowler, Mr. Affleck. I don't have any further questions on the university proposals. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Affleck, you're welcome to leave if you've got no interest in the other application, in the other matters here. But thank you for your contributions. If you are leaving, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Right. Let's turn to issue 2. And we'll look at open space and leisure allocations. Can I just understand who might be speaking for the partnership on these matters?
Yes, sir. Could I introduce Mrs. Appleyard? She'll be speaking on this first matter in relation to Bor 2.
Thank you.
Sorry, also in relation to Helston.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so if we look at Barbara, Colney Lakes.
Mhm.
Can you please tell me about the current nature of the site? And it's a very extensive area, and there's a fishing operation on it. But can you please tell me about the current nature of the site, please?
Certainly. So basically, the site currently is, as you said, is being leased for the fishery lakes, and it also provides bird watching opportunities and etc. The idea of carrying the site forward is so that the site can be part of the green infrastructure corridor, which is been identified in the green infrastructure study. And that certainly would help to link the area between the Yare Valley Parkway all through to the west in through the Whitlingham Lake in the southeast of the city.
So I'm interested to explore the whether there's a reasonable prospect of it coming forward in the planned period. It's been an existing allocation, isn't it?
That's correct.
So given that it's not come forward to date, what are the prospects of it coming forward in this planned period?
I think we would certainly say that there could be possibilities with the green infrastructure work that is currently underway, that opportunities could come up in terms of purchasing the land. I know there's going to be various funding identified through the green infrastructure study. So we believe that is possibly an option during the plan period.
But so there is a possibility, but is there a reasonable prospect? And is there more than just a possibility? Where is the evidence that there would be a reasonable prospect of this site coming forward for this country park?
Well, although we haven't received a statement of common ground for this site, we just believe that there is general prospect that it could be delivered through the plan period, through, like I mentioned, through the green infrastructure work, that there could be funding, and that it could come up for purchase, or we could follow that up. So yeah, we believe there is a prospect that the site could come forward during the plan period.
Is there evidence that is within the examination library that would support that case, that there is a reasonable prospect of it coming forward?
The main document that I could point you through is the green infrastructure study, which identifies the site for possibilities for the green infrastructure corridor, but we don't have a statement of common ground.
And is there and what's the reason why there isn't a statement of common ground? Has there been engagement with the landowner?
We had difficulties initially with the ownership. Yeah, I admit that, but we have tried to make contact. We haven't heard so far.
So this has been allocated in the previous local plan.
That's correct.
For development, and you're proposing to take it, but what level of engagement has there been with the landowner to help bring this forward?
I'm afraid we haven't had much response. We obviously consulted on the site throughout the stages of the plan. We didn't have any objections of being reallocated for this use, and we know we haven't had any further contact from the landowners.
Do you know how many different ownerships the land is in?
I believe there may be around 5.
And they've all been silent in terms of your efforts to engage them in its development?
That's correct.
How would the partnership see this site then coming forward? What is there a plan How will it come forward?
Well, the green infrastructure study, there is additional work going on at this moment in time. And we believe that there will be some funding opportunities through that work. So it is possible that through that, when that funding is, in process, because this site is a part of the Year Valley Parkway, which is a key area identified in the green infrastructure, that it could be pursued in that way.
So the funding that you've referred to, is that funding that is to come from contributions from development, or is it public funding or private funding?
I would have to refer to my colleague Mike Borrell to speak more about the green infrastructure work that's going on at the moment, if that's okay, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Borrell.
Yeah, thanks for that. The green infrastructure strategy is in the process of being commissioned. Now, this will further develop our evidence base stemming from work that goes way back to 2008. So Mrs. Appleyard has referred to this being one of the key green infrastructure corridors. This was identified back from 2008, and the Yare Valley has been very successful during that period in improving access to and through the Yare Valley. So we see this as being an extension to that. So that's why it was identified in Joint Course Strategy, allocated through a South Norfolk Site Allocation Plan. Now, the work that's going to be done through the Green Infrastructure Strategy, one element of that is to identify where there are further opportunities to improve green infrastructure. Now, at present, money is being spent on developing Broadland Country Park to the northwest of Norwich, and the big green infrastructure links to this, and that is being SIL funded partly, and other sources of funding. So we anticipate this being potentially, it would depend on the GI strategy, but retaining this allocation will be very helpful as being another opportunity to develop that already very impressive corridor, but to develop it further. But that would be the green infrastructure strategy. Will be looking at whether funding should be applied to this location or to others as well. So it won't be just this, and that would create, really what is a very high quality link all the way around the south of Norwich, from Whitlingham Country Park in the east to potentially Country Park to the west, and it actually links directly to an existing smaller country park that skirts around the south of Bothorpe, so it'd be an extension to that.
Have the landowners been engaged in the green infrastructure strategy?
This is just being commissioned at the moment, so they will be engaged. We'll attempt to contact them again.
And what is it? Is this in terms of its delivery? Is it intent? Just help me with how you expect to deliver it. Is it that it would remain in the ownership of those landowners, and arrangements would be made to provide public access and to put footpath and cycleway links through it? So, or would it be acquired and developed by the public sector?
It could be either way, but the green infrastructure strategy will look at that, but also it will look at other potential opportunities as well. But retaining this this allocation would be beneficial.
Thank you. Mr. Hatfield.
Yeah, apologies for coming in. Myself and Mr. Warden visited the Castesi site last year, and we were obviously on the northern periphery of this area here. And my recollection is that there were signs up for a fisheries business, so that the lakes are used.
That's correct. Yes,
that's correct. Yeah.
So if there are business uses in place and the land has a commercial value, what prospect does that? What does that signal in terms of the prospects of it becoming available for public access? I mean, public access, for example, could disturb its use as a fishery.
Yeah, so that's precisely one of the questions that the GI strategy will look at. But just to clarify what I said earlier, retaining this allocation would be beneficial in that manner.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, something else. You said you visited the Cossey area. This site is actually quite pivotal, because if you look at document A1, the main GNLP strategy, map 8B, which is the GNLP corridors, this location is actually where two different major corridors to the west of Norwich separate. So it's the Yare Valley corridor, and then a corridor that goes up to the west of Bowthorpe, through Cossey, and then down to the Wensum Valley. So it does potentially provide a really key link.
Thank you. I don't think we dispute of any issue with the importance of it as a link. What our concern is with whether there is a reasonable prospect of it being delivered, and the understanding the approach that will be taken to bring it forward.
Yeah. So, well, my view is there is a reasonable prospect, but it can only be said to be reasonable.
Okay. What is the timetable for the completion of the green infrastructure strategy?
It's being commissioned now. I think it will take about a year to complete.
And is it the partnership that's undertaking it, or the council?
It's the partnership. Yeah. So we, as you're aware, we pool our self-funding, and have already done so. I've referred to Broadland Country Park earlier. There's been a number of improvements to the Yare Valley through pooled SIL. So this is, well, sorry, I'm saying it again, but this is key strategically.
Mr. Hatfield, have you got any further questions?
No further questions on this site, no. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hatfield and I will reflect on what we've heard today. Thank you. Can we now turn to Reapham Road, Land North Reapham Road, Helsden? This is a site that is allocated for recreational open space. Can you just give me the background to the site, please?
Yes, absolutely. Basically, this site was allocated in the last local plan at Broadland, and we are currently seeking to reallocate it in this plan. For quite some time, there has been a long deficiency of recreational open space at Helsden. I believe Mr. Wolchester mentioned this in his response when he was speaking on Matters 1, where he was explaining that the development and management DPD has been the main evidence base in terms of how the requirement for recreational open space is set, and the fact that the development management DPD is not being superseded by this plan. And so that is the rationale for carrying this site forward. The other aspect is that for longstanding, the parish council at Helsden has been wishing to carry this site forward and has submitted a statement of common ground stating that they wish to pursue this site.
I'm sure Mr. Carpenter will wish to come in a moment, but can you tell me where is the evidence that this site can come forward for open space?
The main document that I would point you through, please, is the statement of common ground from Helsden Parish Council, which states that they wish to continue to carry the site forward, and they wish to engage with the landowners with the possibility of purchasing the land. They have stated when we have asked them about whether they had the funds available to carry the site forward, They have said that they have some reserves. They have also said that they could borrow the necessary funds from the public works loan if necessary, and they would like Broadland District Council to assist them in liaising with the landowners with the possibility of taking the site forward.
Mr. Carpenter, would you like to, can I invite you to come in and join the discussion?
Yes, thank you, sir. Yeah, if we're just dealing for the moment about the availability of the site and the effectiveness of the allocation, I would like to go back to the justification for it later on, if I may, but just dealing with the effectiveness. This is part of an agricultural enterprise, productive agricultural enterprise. It's part of a larger field within that enterprise. We have not been formally approached by either the parish council or the district council or the partnership to take this land. It is just simply an allocation that has appeared, and the Drayton Farms have no intention of doing anything with this site other than continuing to farm it as part of an important part of their farming enterprise. Just because somebody else would like to take it and use it for some other purpose doesn't make the policy of allocation effective, I'm afraid. So that is our position on the effectiveness of the plan.
Thank you. So, Mr. Carpenter, is the site available?
No.
Can the partnership please then explain to me how this, if this policy, let's assume for the moment this policy is in the plan, how would it be implemented given what we've just heard?
Can I also add, please, that the site...
Sorry, on mute, Mrs. Appleyard.
Apologies. Can I just say that the site, 3 hectares of the site have been leased to the parish council for open space since 2001. So yes, I understand what you're saying, that the remaining of the land has been cropped. That is correct. But it is an ambition from the parish council that they would like to take forward the site. They would like to, you know, this liaise with the owners. They would like Broadland District Council to assist them, and that is why we have decided to reallocate the land, in addition to the fact that there is currently a deficiency of recreational open space, and it would be in line with Section 8 of the MPPF, paragraph 93, to continue to promote healthy and safe communities by providing open space for recreational open space purposes.
So what mechanism do you would you envisage would be used to bring this site forward for the uses which the plan proposes?
Well, the statement of common ground from the parish council say that they have some reserves for purchasing the land. They have said that they could borrow money from the public works. They have made some reference to compulsory purchase as a last resource, of course. But you know that is how they wish to carry the site.
Mr. Carpenter.
Yes, thank you. Ambition, I'm afraid, does not make it effective. It is true, but it is true that part of the allocation was leased back in 2001 by my clients to Helston Parish Council. That was a discussion that was held between the Parish Council and Drayton Farms. Drayton Farms made the decision at that time that taking 3 hectares of land for the purposes of open space would not greatly affect the farming of the land, but there was not a discussion, and Drayton Farms would not have entered into the discussion had they wanted the full amount of land, the 11.9 hectares that is allocated now, because as soon as you start to eat into an existing farming enterprise, making fields smaller than they currently are, it creates all sorts of difficulties for farming the land. And so, again, I say this land is not available. It is farmland. It is highly productive farmland, and we shall keep it as such. And just because the parish council would like to has an ambition to use the land for some other purpose, I'm afraid does not make it effective and does not suddenly make it available. Thank you.
Thank you. Would the partnership please like to respond to that point made by Mr. Carpenter?
All I can say is that the site was allocated for recreational open space in the last local plan, which is to 2026. So yes, the site has been farmed for quite some time. It has also been allocated for recreational open space for quite some time as well.
But how would the site come? You've referred to potential CPO, or you have, and it's also in a statement of common ground. But how? Just tell me how do you envisage it being able to be brought forward for the uses that you propose, given that the landowners say it's not available?
The only thing I can say is that the parish council has submitted a statement of common ground saying they wish to purchase the land. They have mentioned the possibility of CPO, and that's the only drive, and that's the only option I can see.
And how far have those CPO discussions with Broadland got?
I don't think very far is the case. I don't think it's gone very far. I think they have expressed a desire by submitting this statement of common ground, but I don't think that there has been meetings to this effect at this present time. The other thing I would add as well is that obviously they have produced a neighborhood plan, and they have said in their neighborhood plan that they wish to maintain their existing recreational open space allocations. They wish to keep those.
And is this site referred to in the neighbourhood plan?
It's mentioned in general their existing recreational open space.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Carpenter. Mr. Carpenter, I'm also happy to hear from your concerns about justification.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Yeah, just a point of clarification on the neighbourhood plan. The neighbourhood plan does not allocate this site for recreational open space. It mentions it, but does not allocate it.
Is that because it's proposed is that because it's already allocated in the plan?
I don't know, sir. I wasn't involved in preparing the health and neighbourhood plan, so it's just simply it is not an allocation that has been taken from the 2016 Broadland local plan and put into the neighbourhood plan.
Thank you. So, Mr. Carpenter, do you want to just let me just outline your concerns about the justification for this allocation?
Yeah, and I think it's a fairly simple series of points that boils down to one point, being this site is not justified, and the details of those points are, as you know, within our Regulation 19 representations. But the simple points are that there is no evidence of an assessment of quantitative need for recreational open space prepared to inform this plan. There is no evidence of an assessment of qualitative need for recreational open space prepared to inform this plan. And there is no evidence of an assessment of reasonable alternative strategies or sites for the provision of recreational open space in this plan. There is only an admission from the partnership that this particular allocation has been brought forward from a previous 2016 plan and a consequential reliance on evidence produced for that plan based on data of 2014. So that evidence is accepted by the partnership to be out of date. And I refer, rather than going through the details of that now, sir, but to paragraphs 4.13 and 4.17 of our Regulation 19 representations. So it simply fails the test of soundness. It is not justified, taking into account the reasonable alternatives and based on proportionate evidence, as required by paragraph 35 of the NPPF. And it's probably worth just quoting as well, just very briefly, paragraph 98 of the NPPF, particularly in view of the suggestion that Helston Parish on its own has a deficit, because paragraph 98 simply says that planning policies should be based on robust and up-to-date assessments of the need for open space, sport and recreation facilities. Conclusion gained from the assessments should be used to determine what open space, sport and recreation provision. We have no up-to-date evidence. So, sir, the simple point is this site is not, this allocation is not justified in any way whatsoever.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. Can you just ask the partnership what when the existing local plan was reviewed, moving into this local plan, how was that policy reviewed, which led to this policy? What process did you go through to satisfy yourself that this site is justified, can be effective and can be delivered?
Yes, sir. In terms of our evidence base, I would draw your attention, please, to the Appendix 1 that we submitted with our Matters 14. That clearly sets out the evidence base that we have utilized to set this site to come forward. So the first thing is, as I mentioned previously, is the Development Management DPD, which sets the standards for requirement for the recreational open space. And then in the back of Appendix 1, we have a table, which is part of our monitoring process, where we monitor.
So, Mrs. this is Appendix 1 of the plan?
No, sorry, this is Appendix 1 of our response to Matters 14.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So so I was saying, within that monitoring section, which is a table at the back of Appendix 1, we have the existing open space at Helston. And if you look at the column, the last column, which is the sports column, we can see that we have a deficit of 14.41 hectares of recreational open space at Helston. That is the main evidence base that we utilize to justify the reason for reallocating this site. And that's all I have to say for this for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter.
Yes, thank you. Interesting, Mr. Appleyard says this is the evidence that they have to support it. So if I can just perhaps go through those points one by one. First of all, the Development Management DPD, and as Mrs. Appleyard said, Mr. Worcester made reference to this in Matter 1, that is not going to be superseded by the current Greater Norwich local plan and goes to 2026. There seems to be a suggestion that therefore the allocation remains, but the Development Management DPD policy that is referred to is policy RL1, which has been copied, I think, by the partnership in their response to Matter 14, but it has a completely different purpose. It is not an allocation policy. This policy reads, this policy deals with new residential development consisting of 5 dwellings or more coming forward, and a requirement for those developments to provide sufficient open space to meet the formulaic measurement of so many hectares per thousand population. It is a development management policy. It is not an allocation policy. The allocation was made in the Broadland Local Plan Sites Allocations DPD, which is going to be superseded by this Greater Norwich Local Plan. So to simply refer to and then dismiss any need for proper justification by simply saying that there's a development management policy that deals with something that is completely different doesn't really resolve the basic point that there is no justification to allocate this site in this local plan. If I can then just turn to what Mrs. Appleyard has said is the justification and the evidence for the allocation in this plan. They have produced Appendix 1 in response to the Matter 14, your Matter 14 questions. This is the first time we've seen this table. So I have, first of all, a number of questions about it and a number of comments about it, and I'll be interested to hear what Mrs. Appleyard's response is. So, what is this document? Where is it from? What is its purpose? Did it inform the preparation of the local plan? If so, why is it not submitted as part of the evidence base with the local plan? We need to see the whole document to put it into context. Does it identify deficits in other parishes? If so, what is being done in those parishes? And it deals with a single parish and takes no account of the needs and provisions within easy access of the parish of Helston. And we can come and discuss some of the spaces that might be within easy access, but I don't want to get away from the principal point that there is no justification, and this does not represent justification. But the important reference to my concern there about dealing only with a single parish is that we should note that Sport England's playing pitch strategy guidance recognises that the extent of any study area should be of sufficient scale to ensure cross-boundary demand, movement and supply is all captured in that assessment. And the Sport England notes that normally that is based on a local authority area, not on a single parish area. And my final comment, passing comment on this particular appendix, this table, which Mrs. Appleyard says is the extent of their evidence, it's wrong. It is wrong in any case because it doesn't include Cottingham Park. Cottingham Park is the 3 hectares of land that has been brought into use by our clients leasing that land to Helston Parish Council. So it's evidence, it's a piece of paper, which I don't know where it's come from, not seen it before. Nobody's had an opportunity to consider it as part of the preparation of the local plan. It doesn't cover a wide enough area. It doesn't meet the standards of standard methodology of assessing these matters, and it's wrong in any event. Sorry, I'll leave it there. There's a couple of questions in there.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. Ms. Appleyard, would you just be able to help me then with the comments, the concerns of Mr. Carpenter that have just been set out? And if you could also just explain to me, if you could take me through Appendix 1 and just explain to me 2 what it means. So you can deal with that, please, but also Mr. Carpenter's point about that it's, in his view, in error in any event, and that he is unsure about where it has come from.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so the Appendix 1 makes reference to the development management DPD, like I said, and that is because that sets the standard basically of the requirement of open space. That's what I was referring to previously. The table that Mr. Carpenter has questioned is part of our monitoring of open space in the district. So we have all the other parishes listed as well, as you asked your question. So yes, we have that. We have that. We utilize that to see where there's a deficit, and as you know, there's been lots of. It is part of their work that they use to monitor recreational open space. The reference that you made about the Cottingham Park not being listed, I think it's just an omission. One of the reasons is because we didn't really want to double count it. So if we were saying that that area needs to be allocated, but it's just been an omission. But yeah, I understand that, and that's all I have to say. Thank you.
You're on mute, Mr. Warden.
So I'm so sorry, I've done it again. Could you just explain to me how the table on Appendix 1, what that refers to and what it means?
Yes, certainly. The table basically lists out the different open spaces that are available at Helston and what type of open space they are. So we have divided into play areas and sports, because the policy in the DMDPD not only mentions recreational open space, but also mentions a need for children play space as well. So that's why it's divided into those different columns. So basically the Cottingham Park that you mentioned, Mr. Carpenter mentioned, should probably be in the amenity space. So there should be 3 hectares in that table at the moment. But because we are wishing to reallocate the site for sports and recreation, yeah, that's why it's obviously not there. Where we have an area which is crossed off, that is another site which was utilized for sports and is no longer available since 2017. So that's why it's crossed off. And then at the bottom, the last row of the last sentence at the bottom of the table explains the current population of 11,463. That's based on 2020 estimates, and the row which is grayed out is the provision, which takes into account the surplus or deficit in the different categories of open space. So that's where the last column, which says sports, the requirement of 1.68 per hectare for 1,000 population, and a deficit of minus 1441. And also the column adjacent, which is the play areas, which is 0.34 hectare per 1,000 population, and gives you a deficit also of 2.68 hectares. That's what the table is trying to explain, sir.
What are the implications of this site not coming forward as proposed in the local plan?
The implication, sir, is that Helston Parish Council will continue to have a deficit of recreational open space for sport, and will continue to have a deficit for play areas as well. That is the outcome, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Mr. Carpenter.
Thank you, sir. I'm slightly reluctant to get into a great long debate about the details of this table, because I don't think it represents evidence for this local plan, because it was not produced until the Matter 14 the questions, their answers to the questions on Matter 14. It is not a document that meets the requirements of properly assessing, being proportionate evidence and properly assessing the quantitative and qualitative needs across the local plan area. And that is what is required for it to be justified for this local plan. So I'm slightly reluctant to get involved in the details of this particular appendix and table. But having said that, I kind of feel the need to, when people start to suggest that this is somehow justifying a position that the plan has taken by simply adopting something from 2016 and suggesting that this is now up to date. So please, can I just come back to the point that this is Helston only. This does not take into account the Nest facility, which is in the adjacent parish and highly accessible to Helston. The Nest facility, sir, if you're not aware of that, I suggest that it would be helpful if you could refresh your knowledge of that site. It is a community foundation site that was brought forward just in the adjacent parish, and is an excellently run community hub, partly funded, I have to say, by the partnership, with many football pitches, but other sports as well. The reference to the Broadland Country Park is also just to the north in the adjacent parish of Drayton to this site. There are also Drayton Woods and Cannon Woods in the parishes of Horsford and Drayton, just to the north of this site. So there's a lot of other open space available to the residents of Helston if they wanted to access those. But as I say, that is me straying into areas which I don't think are terribly relevant to the basic question of, is this allocation justified with proportionate evidence? Because I don't think it is. And one final point on that, if I may, is the timing of this. Did it inform the preparation of the local plan? I don't think Mrs. Appleyard has answered that question. And where is this from? We've done some digging since receiving the answers to your Matter 14 questions, but it's been digging around the edges. It is certainly not in the evidence library. So far as I can work out, when it says the source is the Norfolk Insight total population, that is a population database that anybody can access. But this table has been extracted from that to by Broadland Council or the partnership to use as an audit for open space, as Mrs. Appleyard has suggested. But this is their document. It's an in-house working document, which has suddenly been produced as evidence to support an allocation in a local plan. And I'm afraid that's not good enough. It is not. That does not make it evidence, and it does not make it evidence that is admissible and relevant to the forming of a local plan that seeks to allocate land.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. Mr. Appleyard, can you just help us here with where this document has come from? It's titled Broadland Open Space Audit, Helston, Update 2020. So presumably there was an earlier version. How has this been part of the evidence which has informed this local plan, the review of the last local plan into this local plan, and has this been publicly available?
Can I just kind of clarify one point first? The sentence at the bottom where it says source Norfolk Insight total population, that refers only to the population. So the update that says 2020 at the top of the page refers to the update of the population. That's what that means. So that's why it says update. So because obviously in order to recalculate the current need of open space, we would have obviously had to take an account of the population, of course. And the population that we had in this document previously, I think was, I can't remember if it was 2017 or 2011, but it was a different population figure. So in order to recalculate the figures, we had to obviously update the population numbers. And that's what that source refers to. And that's what the update is. In terms of the whether it's been accessible, I'm afraid no, it has not been accessible. It's just part of the monitoring that the council holds unless it's available on the Broadland website. But no, it hasn't been. Yeah, that's all I can say. Yeah.
Thank you. Just a question, Mrs. Appleyard. Did there's a statement of common ground with Helston Parish Council. Has the partnership and the landowners discussed a statement of common ground?
I don't believe so. I don't think so. No, I think the statement of common ground that the parish council submitted said that when we asked them whether there was any discussions with the landowners, they said none at present, but they would like to. That's all I can say.
And the partnership hasn't sought to bring forward a statement of common ground.
The partnership, initially when co-development submitted a statement of common ground to say that the site wasn't available, we replied to say that we still wish to allocate the site, and we were contacting the parish council to see whether they wanted to submit a statement of common ground. So they obviously they were aware that that work was underway, but I don't believe that there was any meetings between the three parties.
Thank you. I'm going to draw.
That's all I can say.
Thank you. I'm going to draw this discussion to a close. Mr. Carpenter, you've got your hand up, so you might like to come back on that point, Mr. Carpenter. And then I'd like just to, Mr. Carpenter, let you say anything that you've not said to me that you think I should know about. And then I'll ask the partnership if they've got any response, and then we'll break. Thank you, Mr. Carpenter.
Thank you. Yeah, yes, just a point of clarification really on that last point. The partnership did ask us, as they, I think, asked all the landowners of land that was allocated to sign a statement of common ground. Our response was there is no common ground, and therefore and the site is not available, and therefore there's nothing to say in the statement of common ground other than that the site is not available and there's no common ground. That was our position, is our position now. Nobody has had any discussions with us, either the partnership or the parish council, about taking this land for public recreation purposes. I think, sir, if I may, just one final point, and again, I don't wish to get drawn onto things which I don't think represent evidence, because I don't want to take it away from the principal point that there is no justification. But part of that statement of common ground that was submitted by the parish council had appended to it a report which was prepared and submitted, I understand, at Reg 18 stage, not at Reg 19 stage. And that report was prepared by a company, PLC, which was for a very specific purpose, as I understand, which was another site at Heath Crescent, to justify the parish council's view that that site should be retained as, or should be gone from private open space into public open space. It was a document that was prepared for a very particular purpose. It was certainly not prepared to justify this site allocation, and again appears from nowhere. It's almost, and with the greatest of respect to the partnership, it seems to me that there's a lot of scurrying around to try to find some evidence to support an allocation that they've just dragged from one local plan into the next. And I'm afraid, again, my basic point, that does not satisfy paragraph 35, is not justified and is not sound. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. Does the partnership wish to say any, or wish to give a response as a final response?
The only thing I would say about that reference to that other document which is on the website is that is correct. That open space study was specifically for the desire to allocate the other site for open space, which Mr. Carpenter explained. That is correct, but it also demonstrates how much the parish council wished to improve the local need in the situation at Helston. That's the only reason. That's the only and I have nothing further to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Appleyard. Okay, thank you. We shall take a break now. It is 5 to 11, so we'll take a 15-minute break, and we will resume at 11:10. Well, we should continue working our way through these sites listed as part of issue 2. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Welcome back. Can everyone hear me? Thank you. Right, we're going to move on to the next site, which is land west of Poppy Fields, reference HET3. Can you just tell me about this? And I don't know whether Mr. Ball or Ms. Jones, who's going to speak.
Samantha Jones will be speaking on this.
Thank you. If you could just tell me about this site. It's been allocated in existing local plan for open space, and it relates, as I understand, to the adjacent housing development. So can you please tell me why it hasn't come forward?
Good morning. The site was allocated previously, as you mentioned, and it was carried forward given the extensive development that's occurring in Heatherset, which is continuing to be developed. So it seemed appropriate at the time to carry it forward to safeguard this land for future open space should it come forward. In addition to that, the land is actually got significant archaeological issues and impacts on the site, so it's considered an appropriate use for open space rather than any other use on the site.
Thank you. So is there a reason why it hasn't come forward before?
No, not. There's no actual reason why it hasn't come forward. As part of the site, there is an access road that isn't associated with the HET1 development, which is as part of phase 5, which is yet to come forward and yet to commence.
So that's a question I've got. Is where is the road going to come across the site?
It's going to come to the eastern boundary, abutting the field, and then continuing it down to the corner. Let me just bear with me 1 second. I'll give you the road name. It's supposed the point of the road is to join with the Great Melton Road to the south.
Okay.
So on the allocation, the HET3 allocation, it's in a dashed line or hatched line, which is on the eastern boundary, and then it goes down to the south.
Just bear with me. Thank you. So sorry, Ms. Jones, we're just able to just I've got the plan up now, the detail. Would you just be able to explain where that's going with? I've got the road names on. So I think Mr. Bull, Ms. Jones may have frozen.
Yes, Sam has frozen, Mike, and you're on mute, Mike, as well.
What I'll do, I'll ask Sam to come around and work from my computer because I think we're on slightly different systems and hopefully this one will be okay. So,
That might be okay now.
Hello, apologies for that.
That's okay.
There is no road names as such because it is a field at the moment, and the phasing that I'm referring to hasn't been developed yet to the north of the allocation. But as the outline plan that was submitted for HET1 did include that access road that is earmarked on HET3 that's tight to the boundaries going down to the south of the site. But as I mentioned, it's not commenced, but it has been an approved road as part of the outline application for HET1.
I see, because so it would be effectively along the eastern boundary.
Yes.
Of the site.
And I think it's also earmarked for a cycle pathway and a pedestrian link as well.
Okay, thank you. On the website, on the statement of common ground section of the website, it says that it's not been possible to contact the landowner.
That's correct. Yes, attempts have been made, but we have not had any response from the landowner.
So how do you know the allocation is deliverable?
I guess we would presume that it would come forward for an open space allocation, given that there is the site has archaeological impacts on it, and that it is a part of the site is saved for this access road.
So do you know who the landowner is or landowners are?
No, we don't. We know who the landowner are. It's one landowner, but contact has been attempted, but we've not actually had a response.
And when was that contact attempted?
Bear with me 1 second while I just confirm that. When did the statement of common grounds happen? Does anyone know? (2020). The process started in 2020, and it's been continued up to the stage of the plan.
So you tried to contact the landowner in 2020.
Yep.
But not so was the contact with the landowner before at different stages of the local plan?
I'm not entirely sure. No, I'm just aware that attempts was made as part of the reallocation for this, and several attempts have been made, and we are yet to have a response.
And do you know why that might be? What do you have any information as to why that might be the case?
No, I'm afraid I have no logical reason why that why we haven't had any response. The only thing that potentially is the fact that the road that has been earmarked for that site is not due until phase 5, and that has not been submitted as part of reserve matters application and hasn't come forward yet.
Because in your partnership response, paragraph 71, you say that it is understood that it is available. So what if you've not been able to contact the landowner? What is it that leads you to say it is understood that it is available?
I think that is to do with the presumption that it's available, given the agricultural nature of the land, and that it has been earmarked for this road as part of a bigger scheme.
But it may be that the road, but if the road might be separate, but the allocation is for informal open space. So is there evidence that suggests that it is available and deliverable for that informal open space?
Not as such. Again, the only thing that I'll just refer to is the fact that the site would not be appropriate for any other use, and it has been carried forward on that pretense.
And the reason why it's not appropriate for any other use is because of its archaeological interest. Is that correct?
Yes, and that is a comment that Historic England have made with the previous allocation, and they would not want to see anything other than open space to safeguard the land to be undeveloped.
So in relation to the permission for the road,
yes.
is that so? Permission has been granted for the road to access HET1, but so that's within the same ownership.
The road element is in the same ownership.
But the permission that relates to the road doesn't relate to this land, the wider part of the site.
That's correct. So the Het 3 in its entirety is a separate landowner to Het 1.
But relies upon the road crossing Het 3 to implement Het 1.
That is my understanding.
Okay, and if this policy has been carried forward from the previous local plan, has there been any changes to this policy compared to the previous version?
It's similarly the same. It's been just carried over. I think there was reference to Het 4 in the previous allocation, but as that's been completed out now and developed, that has not been carried forward. My understanding is conversations were had with development managers to determine the wording, and it was considered appropriate to keep it as existing.
Just final question in relation to contacting landowners, because this is a bit, I suppose it's not just relating to this site, but there are some other sites where there are it's not been possible, you say, to contact landowner. What is the partnership's approach to making that contact?
My understanding that it's an email is sent out with the contact details that we have, requesting an update on what they consider the site to be available and appropriate. I think in the first instance, that is the approach that's been taken with the contact details that we would have and are able to use.
So you don't go to the land registry and then send a letter to the address on the land registry?
I don't believe that's the process that we have undertaken.
Okay. Does anybody wish to make any comment on this site that has not spoken? That's right.
Thank you, sir. I am going to introduce myself with the video, but I have been having very bad reception today, so I may turn off the video if I freeze or you cannot hear me at any point. Do let me know, please. With regards to this matter, we have submitted a statement which I believe has been uploaded correctly, but the populated program is incorrect as far as I can see. So we do represent the trustees of the Richard Gurney Children's Settlement, which is what this matter is listed me under. But for this matter, our statement is in relation to Heatherset, and it's on behalf of the trustees of the First Viscount Mackintosh of Halifax, which we have represented throughout the hearings so far. So on this matter with regards to Het 1 and delivery of the open space and leisure allocation, we have made representations that in relation to the neighbouring site, which sits just south of Het 1 and adjoins the strategic gap between Heatherset and Cringleford, we feel that without consideration of the impacts of both Het 1 and the adjacent, well, the nearby allocation, which is GNLP 0372, I believe, which is the Cringleford allocation, the impacts of those two allocations, which amount to about 3,000 homes, have not taken into account the proposed allocation and impact of the A47, A11 link road that is proposed by Highways England. And if you look at the submissions that we've made, including the representations made by Shields Flynn, landscape architects, preparing both assisting in preparing the strategic gap assessment and preparing the landscape strategy appraisal of the need for additional green infrastructure and addressing the impact of these developments. We consider that this Het 1 open space allocation is not justified and effective or consistent with national policy, given the alternative that has been provided by our clients, which provides a very good connection between Het 1 and the Cringleford allocation. That gives an opportunity to not only link those two settlements in line with which is what is paragraph 92 of the NPPF and paragraph 93 and 98, but also provides the opportunity to enhance what is shown on maps 8 and 9 of the local plan with regards to the green infrastructure strategic links. And without considering this proposed allocation, which provides the permissive path through the strategic gap and providing an update of the strategic gap assessment, the plan cannot be considered to be justified or effective, given the impacts of those two different allocations on either side of that area, but also the fact that we have the extension to the park and ride, which is also proposed adjacent to this site, with the land being leased by my clients, and with the impact of the extension to the park and ride, plus the bisecting of this strategic gap by the new Highways England A47 A11 link, and added to that the further impacts on the social and community infrastructure that will result from these over 3,000 homes on either side of that land. It is wholly unjustified that this allocation to enable the green infrastructure delivery here through providing the mixed use allocation proposed, we feel needs further consideration by the council. And again, if you look at paragraph 98 with regards to the need for the evidence base to be fully robust in terms of the qualitative and quantitative assessment of open space, with that not having been undertaken, we cannot see how the council can justify allocations alternative to what is GNLP 0177B. So I would like perhaps if Mr. Burrell or his colleague could comment on that, please. Thank you.
Well, just before that happens, Ms. Wright, I just need to understand, you're talking about a site that's not allocated in local plan. I'm at the moment dealing with site HET3.
It's in relation to HET. Sorry, was it in relation to HET1? I did send a message to Ms. Feeney with regards to whether now is the appropriate time to come in. I thought you were responding to that message when you asked if anyone wanted to comment at this point.
No, the inspector isn't party to my emails, I'm afraid.
Oh, I thought you'd sent him a message.
No, I just said to you that if you wish to participate, you put your hand up and come in as usual at the appropriate time. So I'll leave that with you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
So Ms. Wright,
I suppose.
So Ms. Wright, are you saying that in your view, the policy HET3, the allocation of that land, is unsound because there are better alternatives for provision of informal open space in the Heatherset area? Is that your position?
That there is I wasn't saying it is unsound, but I was saying it's not justified without the alternatives being considered.
Thank you. Would the partnership just like to respond briefly to that point?
Yes, the site that we did consider, the site that Ms. Wright was referring to, but just to point out that it wasn't just a straight provision of open space, it was a mixed use, which included renewable energies, employment and residential. So we considered at the time that it was an unreasonable, and it wasn't considered as a open space provision on its own.
And Ms. Wright, what you're talking about, sorry, Ms. Jones, what you're talking about here on this site is a fairly reasonably small informal piece of open space.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, thank you.
If I the point I was making, so if I may just continue on that point, earlier point, is that not just that it's an open space allocation. The proposed allocation at the adjacent site is of course a mixed use allocation, but in order that the open space element of it can come forward, it does need the mixed use elements of the specialist care facility and the other uses that have been mentioned earlier.
Thank you, Ms. White. Thank you. Right. So if we can then, I don't have any more questions on poppy fields. Can we move on to bundle, please?
Yes, fine. Could I just go and grab my water from my desk? If
Absolutely.
That's okay?
Would you like a break, Mr. Jones?
No, that's fine. It's just on the cross over
Okay.
there. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm just going to take a 2-minute break. Just 1 moment. I'll just go off screen for 2 minutes. Thank you. Hello, I'm back. I'm so sorry about that. I had to move my car. I'm so sorry. Most apologies. Can we then turn to bundle, please? And I just like, I mean, these sites are connected, and I'd just like to understand about them, please. If we look at the land BR2, it says in the partnership's hearing statement that the site is planning permission for housing, but that the delivery of residential development is not guaranteed. So we're just trying to understand why it is proposed to be allocated if it has for open space, if it has permission for housing, and indeed, if I turn to the detail of the site, if you look at Google Maps, it's got housing developed on the site. So can you just explain to me what the position is, please?
Yes, certainly, sir. At the time of the writing of the plan, the site was it has got permission for housing on it. So this is why we carried it forward, just in case that the allocation and the permission was not implemented, and it would safeguard the site for open space. However, we are aware that the site has commenced and it's substantially complete. So, you know, we would be happy to drop the site, given the fact that it is residential development and it has been started on site.
But the hearing statement was only submitted a couple of weeks ago, and it doesn't say that the site has been substantially completed.
I can only say that apologies for that, and that must have been an error, missing out the detail that it had commenced.
So you're now proposing that the site is to be deleted.
Yes.
A modification to remove the site.
The numbers, the 155 dwellings, have been considered in our housing trajectory.
Just a moment. So this is BR2, BRU2, which would just be completely deleted. What does that mean, that there is a deficit of open space provision if because the site is supposed to be allocated recreation open space? It's now being developed for housing with some open space within that housing, presumably.
Yes.
So is the recreational need met, or is there an implication? Does there have to be alternative provision made for recreational preservation, which would have gone on this site had it not been housing?
The combined of BRUH 2 and BRUH 3 were looked at initially to provide the shortfall of the open space in Brundall, and that was a need that was required by a local needs assessment for the area. Combined with BRUH 2 and BRUH 3, it's considered that the open space provided between, obviously I know we're going to get onto BRUH 3 in a moment, but the provision of open space in the site that's under BRUH 3 does go some ways towards meeting the target. In total, I think it's just over 12 hectares between the two sites. So at this stage, we consider that the open space provision has some effort to be met, and if there is a shortfall, this would be evaluated at a later stage.
How would that be? How would that shortfall be mitigated? How would it be provided for?
I don't know if Mike, you would be able to come in at all.
I think we'd have to do an updated assessment and then assess our options for mitigating that. But the provision through these two planning applications, that there is a good provision through these allocations, but we'd have to assess that in the future.
In terms of a review of the local plan?
Yes, or it could be done locally, but yeah.
Thank you. So BRU2 to be a main modification to delete that. BRU3 then can you just tell me what the position is on BRU3? Sorry, you're on mute, Ms Jones.
Apologies. BRU3 now has planning permission, which was granted at appeal for up to 170 dwellings with alternative provision for open space. This application was submitted in a hybrid outline application with phase 1 submitted in detail. This part of this consent, there was over 10 hectares of publicly accessible recreational land is provided, which includes a country park and footpaths and cycleways. And there's approximately 3 hectares of sports park, which is an informal space. This phase 1, which includes the 23 dwellings and the recreational open space, is due to be on site in September 2022. And my understanding is that reserved matters for the rest of the application is going to be submitted later on this month. Just like to, just point out that this allocation for BRU3, the site that's got planning permission, extends to a larger area of land. The site that's got permission covers 17.4 hectares of land. So whilst it covers the allocation, which is actually earmarked for the playing field in the open space, it does actually cover land to the north and the east.
So if it's got planning permission, and that includes planning permission for open space, the required extent of open space, why does it need to be allocated? Are you suggesting BRU3 should be deleted?
Yes, I think we are. Yes.
You think is that? I mean, I'm not trying to trip you up. I'm just trying to understand what the position of the partnership is.
No, I think we when the application, the fact that it's commenced on site and there's they are planning on submitting a reserved matters application. Yes, we were considered that with this site needs to be dropped.
Just clarify. Yes, we do think it should be deleted.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. And I don't then have any more questions on those 2 sites. Thank you. So I think that concludes on issue 2. So thank you very much for your contributions. Mr. Hatfield is now going to take over, and I don't know whether Mr. Hatfield might want a break, or the partnership might want a break. Ms. Feeney.
Thank you, Inspector. Could I just check that Nicole Wright had covered all the points she wanted to? I've been made aware that in issuing the programme, I listed the representor incorrectly. Ms. Wright's been away on leave and was unable to let me know that until this session, during the session. So I just want to make sure that she feels her points have been covered. Ms. Wright?
Thank you, Ms. Finney. Yes, I wasn't sure whether we've, of course, submitted various representations in writing to you, setting out the case fully on behalf of our clients. I wasn't sure whether the listing on the programme by Ms. Finney was as a result of you having additional questions that you wish to clarify with us, or whether you were satisfied with the information submitted.
So you're not.
So it is listed as we're on this matter representing the Sprowston site on behalf of the Gurney family.
Okay.
But our representations on this matter were actually in relation to the site at Heatherset. And I wasn't sure whether you had queries in relation to the DCO issues that we raised in our statement, or whether the cumulative impact of those works in addition to the allocations in the local plan, or whether you were satisfied with all of the information that was submitted in writing.
I've got all your information that you submitted as part of your hearing statement. I now understand from what you said that it relates to an emission site, and that you consider that the Poppy Field site is not sound because you feel that not all reasonable alternatives for the provision of off-site recreational open space have been considered. That's correct, isn't it?
That's not entirely correct, no, sir. So our representations are that the plan itself is unsound without taking into consideration the cumulative impact of the allocations that Heatherset and Cringleford will have on the strategic gap between Heatherset and Cringleford. The open space and GI assessments undertaken by the local plan evidence base does not give any consideration to the fact that there have been over 3,000 homes eating into the sides of the strategic gap, which is the strategic gap between Heatherset and Cringleford. The strategic gap is also being impacted upon by the Highways England new link road, A11, A47 link road that is going to bisect it at that point, just next to the Park and Ride extension proposed within the plan also. And so we have made representations that in order to ensure that the impact on the strategic gap as a result of both those two major allocations at Cringleford and Heatherset and the intersection, the bisecting of that strategic gap by the new Highways England link road, it is essential that in order to address the impact, both on the landscape setting of the strategic gap and the impact on the green infrastructure that will result from the new allocations of housing, it is going to be essential that there is some development to ensure that the management of that land, that very important landscape setting, can take place and address those impacts through some limited allocations within that strategic gap, which will provide for both the specialist care provision, which is part of that mixed use allocation that Ms. Jones mentioned earlier, as well as a small amount of commercial development just to the north of the area, which would be used as part of the development of the new link road for the compound, which sits adjacent to the Park and Ride. So there are some limited areas identified on the representation, which shows how there could be to ensure that delivery of the management of that area is controlled going forward and can be viably delivered through addressing those impacts and providing some permissive routes through, enhancing both the area for enjoyment by the new residents and existing residents, but also ensuring it's viable to maintain both the waterways and the landscape going forward through the small allocations of that specialist care area facility and also the light industrial allocation proposed in the mixed use scheme.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wright. Thank you. I have got your representations as well that you've made. As inspectors, we can't deal with emission sites. The emission sites are not before us. We can only assess the soundness of the plan that's been submitted, and that includes the sites that have been submitted. But I will invite Mr. Burrell or Ms. Jones to make any comment in response to the points that you've just made that might help us.
Thank you. I'll comment on this. The sites Ms. Wright refers to, they were assessed, they were considered, they were not found to be either preferred options or reasonable alternatives. So they weren't carried forward, but they have been assessed. And then in relation to strategic gaps themselves, review of the detailed strategic gaps would be in a future development management review rather than through this plan.
Thank you.
I had a quick follow-up question for Ms. Wright. It's just on a point that's set out in the hearing statement for this matter. It's at 1.2 of that statement, Ms. Wright. You've said that the plan would be unsound without an area-based policy, and potentially at risk of judicial review. On that point of judicial review, which statute do you think would be breached or infringed by the omission of this site? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So the fact that the cumulative impact of both the Highways England infrastructure works and the community infrastructure impact has not been undertaken within the SEA. So the strategic environmental assessment has not examined in any way what the cumulative impact of the allocations on the strategic gap and of the new infrastructure works, strategic infrastructure works, is going to be on the area. And so that is a huge omission on the part of the plan. The plan has been prepared without any assessment of the impact on the environment fully. The climate, there will be a significant impact on the area as a result of those new housing allocations and that new strategic infrastructure cutting through the area. And the plan has assessed to some minor degree the impact of the housing allocations and made some attempt, a very small attempt at providing a small allocation towards delivering some open space, but it hasn't actually assessed what the movement of the individuals who will be moving into the area from those new allocations, how that would impact on the environmental allocations and designations nearby. And so that impact on the strategic infrastructure and on the environmental and designations nearby needs further consideration in terms of both the HRA and the open space assessment, which I understand has just been commissioned and will be taking place shortly.
Okay, just one point of clarification. It might be a number of people could answer this. It's at what stage of approval is the Highways England work to the junction? Is that been fully signed off? Is it fully approved yet, or is it in the process of being approved? Thank you.
I think the DCO process ends on the 22nd or 23rd of March. And then the decision, it will, I don't know if Mr. Burrell can.
Yeah, the examination is taking place today in parallel with this examination. So
as things stand, it hasn't been fully approved yet. Is that I mean, I don't work on strategic infrastructure.
No, projects. It's going through the same process that we're going through with their equivalent processes.
Okay. Well, in SA terms, and purely on the legal point, if the road isn't yet approved, how could the SA have taken account of it?
In the same way that some of these housing developments haven't yet been delivered because they're planned works. They are part of the strategic infrastructure that is planned for the area. So the impact of that strategic infrastructure and the impact of the housing allocation delivery need to both be cumulatively assessed as part of the plan making process. So even though the infrastructure hasn't yet been built out, it is part of the transport plan of the Norfolk County Council, and the development of the houses will depend on some of that infrastructure being delivered. And so even though that infrastructure is being examined by a separate process, the impact on the area will still result in a significant impact that will be cumulatively should be assessed as part of the plan making process. Okay. Because its deliveries is planned for commencement within the next couple of years, which will be within the plan period.
Okay. Does the partnership wish to respond to those points?
Well, I believe that is dealt with through the separate process that is for the A47 improvements. So the SEA is taken forward through that, but I'll be happy to receive guidance from you inspectors whether you feel there's any issues that need to be covered there.
I think that's one for us to reflect on, really. I'm not a national infrastructure specialist. It's a specialism within the inspectorate. I don't believe Mr. Warden is either. In fact, you're usually encouraged to do local plans or national infrastructure rather than both, though there might be a few brave souls that do both. I think it's one for us to reflect on, and given our lack of familiarity with that area of planning, I certainly wouldn't want to comment on it now or give you guidance now. Like I say, national infrastructure is a separate process and it's a specialist area. We'll reflect on that.
We don't need to know any more information at this stage. We have enough information. No. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Wright, for your comments. Thank you. That concludes issue 2. Does the partnership wish to have a break before we move to issue 3, which is the showground?
We don't need a break, but we will have a change in personnel.
Okay,
so Mr. Morris will now come onto the camera.
Thank you. And I'm going to hand over to Mr. Hatfield. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Issues 3 and 4 are the last 2 to finish. I would expect we'd be finished by lunch with a fair wind. Okay. Issue 3 relates to the Royal Norfolk Showground in Cossey. It's GNLP reference 2074. There's just one question itemised under the MIQs for this issue, and really it's been prompted by the representation we've had from the Royal Norfolk Showground. In summary, it's been put to me that there's an inconsistency between Part 2 of the policy, which requires that any new building and extensions are required to support the main functions of the showground, and the final unnumbered section of the policy, which allows for small-scale food retail, including an anchor unit, cafe, restaurant, public house uses, and other leisure service users, to serve the wider function of the showground will also be considered. So Part 2 requires that new buildings have to support the main function, yet there's another section that allows buildings to support a wider function. And that does on its face appear to be quite a clear inconsistency. Mr. Morris, have you had a chance to digest the representations received, and do you have any thoughts on them?
Yes, sir. What the policy is trying to achieve is a balance between maintaining the nature and openness of the showground and support its role as a showground, but to open up another opportunity to provide some infrastructure that would support the showground and its function, but would also contribute to facilities in the wider area. As you'll see from the map, the showground abuts the housing development taking place in the village of Easton. Up to around 1,000 houses are underway there. And it's also not too far from recent development in Cossey itself, and indeed the contingency site that we've discussed earlier. So we recognise that a facility of the nature of the showground has this sort of multiple function, both in its core function as a showground, and its wider support for the area. So that's the background as to why the policy is worded in the way it is. I think there is an alternative way of taking out any inconsistency, which that will be to modify it slightly so that the final clause about small-scale food retail, etc., would become clause 6 of the policy, and then in clause 2, this is. Can I just clarify? This is just some thoughts that I've had about how this could be developed. This isn't necessarily the partnership's agreed position yet, and clearly would have to take it away. It's for you, sir, to consider whether this overcomes this inconsistency. So we could insert at the beginning of clause 2 words to the effect of, other than development under clause 6, any new buildings and extensions are required to support the main function of the showground. So that then, I believe, would remove that inconsistency.
Okay, well, that would remove the inconsistency. Do the representatives of the showground wish to comment on that proposed modification? Would that resolve your concerns in that regard?
Can I come in on that one? sir?
By all means, by all means.
Hazel, I'm a planning consultant acting for the showground. It's an interesting thought. Our suggestion's been on the table for a long time. It's not just happened in the last few days. We were trying to get the statement of common ground, and we'd signed our document, but it didn't appear to be signed by the partnership, and it just died. I don't know what happened. It just didn't get completed. But even with adding in a clause 6, you have two clauses that almost facing different directions. And it did seem to me that when we're creating now a new policy, it ought to be consistent within itself, rather than seeking to, as it were, two clauses slightly fighting each other. And what we don't know, of course, is what will happen in 5-10 years' time. Those of us around today know what the policy is being proposed, but someone coming in new at a future date will find that confusion, and that's what we're seeking to avoid.
Okay. If I understand your position correctly, Mr. Morris, if I understand the policy correctly, and I'm sure you'll correct me if I've misunderstood anything, clause 2 is basically aiming to support extensions in new buildings to support the key functions of the showground, and there's some flexibility under what would be clause 6 to allow for some other additional uses.
That's correct, sir.
And that general approach doesn't seem to be disputed as being correct. It's purely the inconsistency between the wording, if I understand the showground's position, and ensuring that it's clear, which obviously is a requirement of paragraph 16 in the framework. The policies B, 16D, be clear and unambiguous, and that it's obvious how a development proposal should respond to them. There's probably more than one way to address that. Obviously, we have the suggestion from the showground. You've suggested a way forward. I appreciate there's two separate aims there. You want to, one, be permissive of extensions in new buildings to support the main function, and two, allow for smaller ancillary uses to support a wider function. Those two aims are understood, and that seems to be perfectly reasonable. And so the dispute really is about getting the policy wording right. Is that a fair summary of the position?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Well, I think seeing as that's what everyone wants to achieve, it's just really the more pragmatic task of getting the wording precise to achieve a shared aim, really. Like I say, there's a number of ways it could be done. If I can register the fact that as submitted, there is an inconsistency that needs to be resolved, and therefore this policy does require a main modification, and I'd ask the partnership to come back to me and suggest a main modification. We could thrash out various options now, but perhaps going away from the examination and thinking about it would lead to a better outcome. And if you could have regard, obviously, to the representations that have come in, because like I say, it seems here there's no dispute on principle. It's purely the detail, so that should be a straightforward task to resolve, hopefully. Can I ask the partnership to go away and reflect on that point and come back with a main modification?
Yeah, we're comfortable with that, sir.
Okay, but it does need to be a main modification though, because at present the inconsistency is plain. Okay. Mr. Nicholas, you've got your hand raised.
Thank you, sir. And it's just to acknowledge Mr. Morris's point about trying to achieve the balance, and we'd absolutely support that. This is looking at the future of the North. If I can just on a technical point, it's Norfolk Showground rather than the Royal Norfolk Showground. This is about the Norfolk Showground playing as full a role as possible in the social, economic and cultural development of the area that we live in, and we've fully recognised that there is a balance to be maintained. I think it is just worth making the point, if only to be clear, that a showground, the Royal Norfolk Show, that is what we're talking about, is a 2-day event. We are much more interested in how we use this site in a better way for the other 363 days of the year.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a couple of detailed comments about other areas of the policy I wanted to run through with the partnership, and that, again, they are only brief. Excuse me a second, I've got a bit of a cold, so just do apologise. It's purely on the wording of that final currently unnumbered clause. and it talks about an anchor unit selling a significant proportion of locally produced goods. It's just really to understand what you mean by significant proportion, and whether that's clear enough. And where I'm coming from is, I can see what you might want to achieve with that, but it's whether that gives you enough strength to resist, for example, a national chain store with one aisle of locally sourced goods. And if you want something a bit more bespoke than that, does the policy wording need to be a bit firmer? It's a question for the partnership, really.
Certainly, the wording is intended to avoid simply getting one of the national chains on this site. That's not what we see as the appropriate future for the showground, and it's not necessary for the wider area. So yes, we were trying to link it back to the sort of the agricultural, agri-tech function of the showground and the way it sits within the food enterprise zone, and to maybe use these developments as an advertisement for the local farming industry. So that was the aim. We didn't want to be too restrictive, because if you start putting in percentages and so forth, then you end up arguing about the percentage, or whether something's materially different to the percentage. So perhaps we've fallen foul of trying to provide some flexibility, but also some control.
I think, as with a lot of my comments to the policies, I'm almost thinking of a scenario that you might wish to avoid, and whether the policy wording gives you enough strength to do so. I think I've got no problem with almost the entirety of the clause, really, apart from significant proportion, because significant is an imprecise word, isn't it? I mean, if you wanted mainly or mostly or predominantly, that's a far clearer steer that you want the majority of the goods to be locally sourced. I mean, significant, the opposite of significant is insignificant, but where the line between insignificant and significant comes is very much a hazy one. My only concern is about a lack of precision. And given this policy is going to be revisited anyway, I just ask you to reflect on that point. And again, it's to avoid the outcome which you seem to want to avoid of getting a national chain store with one aisle of locally produced goods in perhaps a shop of 20 aisles.
Yeah, okay.
To avoid that outcome, it might be worth having a think about that word, and it's just simply the two words significant proportion, whether it needs to be a bit more specific than that. But I'll leave that with you to reflect on and perhaps come back with.
Okay, so we'll do that.
Okay. Okay, are there any other comments on the policy before we move on? No. Okay. Thank you for contributions on that point then. In which case we'll move on to issue 4, which are the other area-based policies. As I understand, most of these are modified versions of policies contained in previous plans. The first one, if I can just call it up, is COS 4, which relates to the Cossey Long Water Development Boundary. So we call it up within the document. Okay. Again, I think the comments that I do have on this policy are detailed in nature. Obviously, the need for a policy of this nature is clear and is understood. Having looked at we drove past the site as we were travelling around the partnership area. Having looked at some of the images on Google Maps and some of the businesses listed, it does appear to be a fairly mixed area with a retail park with car showrooms, and away from the main frontages, there are more sort of traditional employment uses. There appears to be an aggregates use as well. So yeah, there are a kind of fairly broad mix of different uses across the wider site. Just a few points on clarity, I think, are the only comments I have.
Can I make a comment, sir, before you?
Yes, by all means.
In preparing for this, I realised that there is actually an error both in this policy and the preceding policy, COS 3, okay, which has come about by altering the original policy to take account of the current use classes order. So in COS 3, which is immediately above, the clause 1 says principally for EG use, it should actually say e.g. B2 and B8 use. In inserting e.g. the B2 and B8 has fallen away. So that's an error that we'll have to make a main modification for.
Okay.
And in the same way, in the final paragraph of COS 4, which is the policy you're concerned about, it again only refers to e.g. employment uses, where it should be e.g. B2 and B8 uses.
Okay. I mean, I hadn't prepared for COS 3. It's not a discussion for today.
No.
COS 4, I thought it had been covered in the sense that it said e.g. employment uses or other employment uses, with the definition of employment giving in the glossary as being B2 and B8 as well. I mean, if you wish to modify it, that's fine, but that's for clarity. But it's sorry.
I think for clarity, sorry to cut across you, sir. I think for clarity, it'd be worth us making those modifications so that they do appear in the policy.
Okay.
The policies.
That's fine. I think with COS 3, it's main modifications territory. Given that the COS 4 already specifies other employment uses, it's probably additional modifications territory. But obviously, that's therefore for you to determine.
Okay.
Okay. Again, I've got a number of just detailed points regarding clarity. I think I've made the point perhaps earlier in the discussion about the use of the term commercial. It's that introductory paragraph, which is again unnumbered, so beginning within the COSI Long Water Development Boundary Proposals 4. And it lists change of use of existing redevelopment or change of use of existing employment, retail, commercial and leisure uses. The word commercial, I mean, it's commonly understood to mean not residential by and large, but it doesn't really have a fixed planning definition. So is it the partnership's position that you wish to restrict the loss of any? I mean, let me just think about how I formulate the question, because in effect, that could be interpreted to mean anything that's non-residential in nature. It almost appears to imply that you're seeking to restrict residential uses. Is that what it's trying to do, or have I misinterpreted?
The function of the policy is to maintain the mix of uses that actually help support the showground, or in the council's view, support the showground to some extent. So hotel, bars, restaurants, that kind of thing in this area. So it's to try and make sure we get that mix. So what I don't think it's trying to say is if you're a minerals aggregates operation, you need to, that's part of the mix that needs to stay in place. So in the sense that those kind of operations could be considered to be commercial, then no, it's not covering. It's not supposed to be trying to maintain that as part of the mix of uses. So the issue is, I suppose, that there are sui generis uses that would come under this idea of protecting the range of uses on the site. So, pubs and restaurants, or pubs, sui generis now. So it's trying to find a form of words that cover those kind of uses without being ambiguous.
I understand that aim, and I think that's obviously the right aim in planning terms. It's purely a detailed point about whether the wording is sufficiently clear. And from what you've just described to me, it seems that the aim of the policy principally is to protect the current function of the area. Current function of the area for leisure, retail, employment, and complementary sui generis uses. Those are the sorts of. It might be that there are. I mean, the way the use classes order has changed since the policy perhaps was first formulated under the previous local plans. There's probably other uses that might be captured in that. I mean, training centres were always the classic one, which weren't strictly an employment use, but were often allowed in employment areas.
Yeah.
The point isn't about the principle, it's about whether it's precise enough or clear enough, particularly with the word commercial, which doesn't have a fixed planning definition and which can be interpreted to mean everything that's not residential. And then I think as that sort of opening paragraph progresses, it says, we'll demonstrate the retention of the site for the same or similar uses has been fully explored. Same or similar is what I struggle with, really, because who determines what's similar in planning terms? Is an employment use similar to a retail use? Is a car dealership similar to a gym. It's imprecise, really. I understand what you're trying to achieve. I don't have any issue with that aim. It's whether that wording is sufficiently clear. Perhaps if it were to mention in a modified form, and I think it does need to be modified for clarity more than anything else. The function of the area is as such and is to be maintained. I want something along those lines, because that's really what you seem to be driving at. You want to preserve the function of the area as it currently stands as a kind of employment, retail, leisure area with appropriate or complementary sui generis uses.
Yeah.
And preserve that function in that part of the city, which is fully understood. I think there also needs to be a clause in there, given the way PD rights have expanded in recent years, about where permission is required as well, because a lot of times permission won't be required, particularly where there's long-standing uses. If I can ask you to reflect on those points and consider some modified wording to assist in clarity. Again, that's with paragraph 16D of the framework in mind. Okay.
Yes. I'm happy to do that, sir.
I mean, a similar comment, part 1, so that's the 6 months marketing requirement, permitted and similar uses. The concern really is about the use of the term similar, because again, that lacks precision really, and it's a subjective judgment about what is and what is not similar. You could argue that any type of uses were similar or dissimilar, and it becomes then difficult to implement the policy on a kind of proposal by proposal basis. I appreciate what you're trying to say. It's marketing of the site for the current use. It might be permitted or other complementary uses given the function of the area. Wording to that effect might achieve what you want with greater clarity. Again, I just ask for you to reflect on that point, really.
Yep.
Part 2. Again, I understand what you're trying to achieve. You want to deter sham marketing exercises, which you sadly do encounter when there's marketing requirements of this sort. There'll be a paper exercise which is almost engineered to generate no interest, and you're seeking to avoid that outcome. But when it says agreed in advance, does that in effect give one of the partner authorities the ability to veto the terms on which a site's offered? Is that and what's the process by which that would be signed off? Agreed how? Because if you're at pre-planning application stage, there's not a mechanism through the planning system to agree it formally.
I think it's. I'm not aware of how this policy is operated. It's been around for some time, so I'm not quite sure if it's been operated in anger, so to speak, and this issue has been faced. But I would imagine it's simply an agreement between the planning authority. It wouldn't be the partnership in this case. It would be the South Norfolk Council. So it'd be an agreement with officers between the officers of the council and the landowner on how what would be considered to be reasonable approach. Ultimately, I'm not sure what part of the planning legislation that would apply. Would be applied to do that.
I mean, it's a bit like the way conditions used to be formulated, and this is a bugbear of mine, but it's provided because it's analogous, really. Where we used to have conditions saying unless agreed in writing, unless agreed by the local planning authority, this must be applied, or developments to proceed in accordance with the approved plans unless agreed in writing with the local planning authority, which implies an informal send an email, get an email back, and it's all okay.
Yeah.
So one thing I often do when I'm in instances where I allow planning appeals, I just strike those out again and again, because there's a process for formally amending conditions. I think there's some analogy here. It implies an informal send an email to the right person, get an email back, and it would almost certainly be people in economic development who would have the knowledge of what terms are reasonable.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll leave it with you to reflect on, really. And if there's been a way that this policy has been operated that has been workable, then perhaps there's a straightforward tweak that could be made to reflect that. But I do have some discomfort with the notion that officers at the council can in effect veto the terms on which a site is offered, for the purposes of this policy at least, or dictate the terms on which a site is offered, and the process by which that would be agreed would be entirely opaque, really. And there doesn't seem to be a clear way of agreeing it. Perhaps terms along the lines of will be offered. There must be policies elsewhere in the country that talk about the terms must be attractive and not deliberately engineered to deter interest. And then perhaps there could be some guidance in the explanatory text setting out the sorts of things you might expect to see. That would be an alternative way of doing it. And usually that relates to length of leases, competitive rates at which properties are advertised at in terms of the lease or to buy. And there's a number of classic tricks that are used to engineer a sham marketing exercise. If I can leave that with you to reflect on, but
Yes,
those
sir.
are the concerns.
Yeah, happy to do that.
Okay. Just one final point, and this is again a detailed point. The way that the 1, 2, and 3 knit together, you've got so 1, and then you have the semicolon, and then it says and, then 2, and then you've got or. So that implies to me that you have to do 1, 6 months of marketing, and confirmation the site has been offered on a range of terms agreed in advance, which we've discussed, or you can. So it implies you can do 1 and 2 or 1 and 3. But would you need to do 6 months of marketing if it's been demonstrated that the site's already adequately served for the type of use to be lost? That's my interpretation of how those. It just relates to those 2 words, and at the end of the first sentence, and or at the end of the second sentence. It implies to me that you either do 1 and 2 or 1 and 3. It doesn't seem to make sense to do 1 and 3 together.
No, it might be better to move 3 to the top, actually. So that's the first stage. Because if it's demonstrated the area is already adequately served, then the other 2 can fall away.
Yeah, you can have the or after 3. That would be one way of doing it. Alternatively, you could merge 1 and 2, and it could just say or at the end. I'll leave that with you, but I think that's again for clarity. Okay, and those are the only comments I had on policy COS 4. Like I say, there's no objection or issue with the principle. It's just those detailed points.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so policy COL. Okay, just ask, is there anyone in the room who wishes to comment on policy COS 4 before we move on? No. Okay. Fine. We'll move on to policy COL 3. This is a very brief policy. I've got no comments on it myself. It's fine as is as far as I'm concerned. And there were no comments on it at Reg 19 stage or in the hearing statements.
No.
Okay, in which case we'll move on to HEFL 1. Again, this is a very brief policy. Just a couple of quick questions on it from my perspective. Firstly, what's the reason for the requirement in terms of the uses to be so specific? So it in effect just allows advanced engineering and technology-based businesses, which is a very narrow set of uses. I appreciate there's the Lotus campus there.
Yeah, I think
but
HEFL is one of the the suite of sites that we have across the area that is highly specialised in what takes place there, and is actually an innovation centre for Norfolk and Suffolk across the LEP area in these disciplines. And the idea behind the policy is to keep that focus as far as possible within the area, and the existing HEFL Innovation Centre is certainly conditioned to such uses, and the idea is to maintain that across the new allocation as well, or the allocation that is yet to be built on. It's a similar situation with the Norwich Research Park, where that one is limited to research and development, which what's that, probably EG2, I think, is the use class. That there is limitation there, and in both cases it's in order to maintain that cluster of businesses that feed off each other and have a sort of synergistic relationship. And with Hethel, as you mentioned, Hethel is quite remote actually. And it's not the place where you might seek to allocate a wide range of employment uses. It's there because of this history of the site with Lotus, and it's become extremely successful. So we're obviously very content and very very focused on bringing the site forward, the new site forward, supporting Lotus, supporting the existing Hethel Innovation Centre. And to do that, we want to maintain a reasonable control over what takes place there.
Okay, that's helpful context, and that approach is understood. Okay, the only I think substantive comment that was raised in relation to this policy was one about the boundary drawn around the Hethel site, in that it excluded a new building that had been constructed recently. And as I look at the site on an aerial map, and I'm using the GNLPs, the map you provide on your website, which superimposes the allocations onto what looks like a Google Maps backdrop, there does appear to be a building where the settlement boundary, the pink dashed line on the right-hand side, the easterly side of the campus, kind of cuts in, and it looks like there's a building there before you get to the wooded area. I'm assuming that's what it refers to. Is that a reflection of the fact that settlement boundaries haven't been reviewed in this plan, that hasn't been changed to take account of that?
Yes.
Okay.
It's exactly right. It's not excluding the site. It's simply that the settlement boundaries will be revised through the development management policies.
Okay. So in effect, it's deferred to the low order plans.
Yes. Well, clearly the new small allocation GNLP 2109 is an addition to the site.
Okay, that's fine. That covers everything I wanted to ask about policy Hethel 1. Okay, which concludes issue 4 and indeed matter 14. So a less punishing day for all concerned today, with a 12:30 finish. Yeah, from my perspective, thank you to the partnership and other participants for your contributions today.
Can I come in, Mr. Hatfield?
Yes.
Just to talk to the partnership. That we're conscious now we're at the end of week 3, and next week we begin week 4, which is the final programme week. So there are, as we've gone through, a number of quite a number now of pieces of work that needs to be done for the partnership, and we are waiting to hear some fairly important bits of information that we will need to help programme the further sessions effectively on East Norwich Gypsy and Travellers at some point. And I'm not expecting you to give me an update now if you don't have it, but it is a reminder that we will need to know where we're going very soon on that, and I would urge you to be able to get that information to us, even if it's a date or a range of a date when you're expecting that information to come to us. That would be really helpful, because Mr. Hatfield and I will have to programme with Miss Feeney some further sessions. At the moment, we're very much in the dark as to when that is likely to be.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, sir. I do intend to send you information on when you receive further information on East Norwich, and when the Gypsy and Traveller study will be finalised this afternoon. So that's on my to-do list for today. So that'll be sent to Miss Feeney.
Thank you. And on all the other bits of work that we've asked you to do in terms of modifications, Ms. Feeney will assist in providing the appropriate means of dealing with that in terms of a table, etc. That would be helpful to us as we move forward.
Yes, we'll do that. But obviously, I believe that your priority is to get the information about East Norwich and Gypsy and Traveller study first, and I will do that.
Yeah, we need to know where we're going once we get into next week, and this time next week we will need to know where we're going in terms of next steps, as you do.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. That's completely accepted. And the good news is we do have dates, so
okay, thank you.
they will be sent to you shortly. And apologies yesterday for my leaving the meeting just before you posed a question to me. I won't do that today.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ball. Thank you. Okay, that's that. I don't know if Mr. Hatfield wants to say anything, but from my point of view, thank you for your contributions this week. We've had a long week, and wish you a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And good weekend to you as well.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.